This is Playthings, a collection of odd tales. A Boohouse Books production. Created and narrated by Mark Steven Nordlund. Boohousebooks.com. There is a particular danger in remembering childhood only by its light. We polish it, we soften it. We let the sharp corners of it dull our hands until the past feels like a room washed in afternoon sun. Carpet warm beneath our knees, plastic faces smiling up at us from toy chests that never seemed deep enough to hide anything truly terrible. We tell ourselves those were simpler days, safer days. But memory is a curator with preferences, and it has always favored the bright paint over the peeling wood beneath. It forgets how long the hallway looked after midnight. It forgets how certain toys seem to watch rather than wait. It forgets the rules we made up because something in the dark was already making its own. These stories are not here to ruin your nostalgia. They are here to complete it. To remind you that games required stakes, that dares were contracts, that every cherished object was once held so tightly it felt alive. Childhood was never empty. It was crowded with imagination. And imagination is a door that does not always close behind you. If you listen carefully, you may still hear the rattle of dice from an empty room, the slow creak of a lid lifting somewhere it shouldn't. The past does not stay buried in toy boxes. It waits there, and sometimes it remembers us far better than we remember it. Story 1. The Clinic. The small business advertised itself as a restoration service, not a repair shop, which was the first sign that it understood something about what people were actually bringing through its door. The window display featured a row of stuffed animals, posed in soft lamplight, each one impossibly symmetrical, fur brushed in a way no child would ever maintain. A small placard in careful script read, "Exactly as you remember." That phrase worked on people. They entered with hesitant smiles, clutching fabric bundles wrapped in old blankets or tucked into reusable grocery bags. They joked at the counter about plush surgery and cotton triage. Their voices lifted slightly above comfort to compensate for embarrassment. Adults were not supposed to care this much about stitched animals missing eyes and limbs, but they did. Behind the counter, the technician did not laugh. "We restore memory integrity," she would say calmly, lifting each toy with the delicacy usually reserved for newborns or fine china from the 11th century. "The goal is accuracy." Accuracy to what? No one asked. The waiting area smelled faintly of lavender and old fabric softener. Framed photos on the walls displayed before and after transformations. Time-worn bears restored to glossy youth. Flattened rabbits reinflated to gentle plumpness. Dolls with reattached porcelain smiles. The difference was not dramatic. It was precise. The after versions did not look new. They looked remembered. That distinction mattered. The first person to notice something strange had brought in a bear whose ear had been torn in childhood during a poorly supervised backyard game. The tear had been part of the bear for decades, a small scar that made it recognizable in dim light. When the bear returned from restoration, the ear was flawless, seamless, perfectly rounded. "You fixed it too well," he said lightly at pickup. "We repaired the structural damage," the technician replied. "Is that not what you wanted?" He laughed, embarrassed by his own hesitation. "Of course, it just looks different." "Different from what?" He paused. The image of the torn ear flickered uncertainly in his mind, like a photo viewed too long. "I guess I misremembered." That night, he placed the bear on the dresser in his bedroom, where it had sat since adolescence. He slept well. He did not dream of the backyard. He did not dream of the argument that had preceded the torn ear, the raised voices, the sudden shove. In the morning, he struggled briefly to recall why the ear had ever been damaged at all. He dismissed the discomfort as adulthood smoothing childhood drama into harmless anecdotes. He was not the only one. A woman retrieved a rabbit whose faded pink fur had been sun-bleached to nearly white. The restoration returned it to vibrant blush, evenly saturated, the way she insisted it had always been. When she held it against her chest, she felt a rush of warmth so sharp it bordered on vertigo. "It's exactly like before," she whispered. Before what? She could not fully articulate. That evening, when her sister mentioned the summer their parents separated, the summer the rabbit had been left in a moving box for weeks, the woman frowned. "That wasn't the same year," she said slowly. "You're mixing things up." Her sister stared at her. "No, it was." The argument dissolved into uncertain laughter. At the clinic, the waiting list grew. Customers began driving from neighboring towns, bringing animals sealed in plastic containers, wrapped in archival tissue paper, guarded like relics. The technician accepted each one without commentary, cataloging them in a ledger written by hand rather than computer. One afternoon, a man arrived with a dog-shaped plush whose stuffing had long ago compacted into uneven density. One leg sagged permanently. The fabric had thinned where small hands once gripped it too tightly during nights of fever. "I don't want it to look new," he said immediately, defensive before being accused. "Just stable." "We reinstore memory integrity," the technician repeated. He nodded, though he did not fully understand the phrasing. When he returned for pickup, the dog stood upright on the counter, balanced, symmetrical. The sagging leg corrected, the fabric reinforced visibly from within. It looked stronger than it had ever been. He held it and felt a strange resistance in his chest, as if something inside him were being quietly rearranged. That night, he could not remember the hospital room where he had clutched the dog at age 8, waiting for news that never came in the form he had hoped. The dog no longer carried that weight. Neither did he. The clinic did not advertise aggressively, yet it never lacked for business. Word spread in the careful way that deeply personal services spread, through whispers, through guarded recommendations. People described a lightness after retrieval, a subtle easing of something that had been knotted for years. "It's therapeutic," someone said in a waiting room, smiling too brightly. "Yes," another agreed. "Like closure." Closure. The word hovered in the lavender air. The first true disturbance emerged gradually. Siblings began disagreeing about shared childhood events. Minor details at first: who had owned which toy, what color something had been, whether a tear had existed at all. "You're wrong," a brother insisted gently during a family dinner. "It was always like this." His sister stared at him, unsettled. "No, it wasn't." He shrugged, holding the restored bear in his lap without realizing he was doing so. The clinic's walls filled with more framed transformations. The technician's ledger thickened. The phrase, "exactly as you remember," remained centered in the window, its script unchanged. A local therapist began referring clients. "It helps reframe trauma," he explained to a colleague. "Physical restoration encourages narrative repair." The colleague hesitated. Or narrative replacement? By the time the first accusation surfaced publicly, it sounded hysterical. A woman claimed that after restoring her doll, whose porcelain face had once been cracked during an accident she blamed herself for, she could no longer access the memory of the accident at all. She described a blankness where guilt had lived for decades. "Isn't that good?" someone asked during a tense community meeting. She shook her head slowly. "I don't feel relieved. I feel edited." At the clinic, business continued. One evening, a customer lingered after closing, watching through the glass as the technician carried a newly restored lion into the back room. The door did not fully latch. Through the narrow gap, he saw shelves, hundreds of them. Each shelf had a small translucent container, no larger than a jewelry box. Inside each container, suspended in clear solution, was something pale and fibrous. Not stuffing, not fabric. Thread. Memory, perhaps. He blinked and stepped back from the door, heart hammering at the absurdity of the thought. When he returned the next day to confront the technician, he found the clinic empty. The shelves were visible now from the doorway, lined with containers filled only with neatly folded scraps of original stuffing and worn thread. "Structural reinforcement," the technician said calmly behind him. "We preserve what we remove." "What do you remove?" he asked, throat dry. "Instability." He looked at the bear on the counter, flawless and serene. "How do you know what's unstable?" She smiled faintly, not unkindly. "You bring it to us." In the weeks that followed, the clinic's influence became harder to articulate, but easier to feel. Conversations among friends grew smoother. Old grievances evaporated mid-sentence. Photographs seemed brighter in retrospect. Childhood stories simplified into tidy arcs without sharp edges. The toys, meanwhile, sat in bedrooms and on shelves, perfectly balanced, their seams visible, their expressions unchanged. They no longer sagged under remembered weight. One evening, during a storm that pressed rain against windows with impatient rhythm, the power flickered in the clinic. The technician moved calmly through the dim space, checking each shelf. The containers vibrated faintly. The fibrous contents within them shifted. Outside, across town, customers paused mid-thought as a ripple passed through something internal, an echo of pain, briefly resurfacing before settling again. The technician adjusted the lids. The vibration ceased. In the morning, the clinic window displayed a new placard beneath the original slogan. "Restoration is preservation." The toys in the window sat upright, pristine and obedient. Across town, adults went about their days with a subtle lightness they described as healing. They did not notice the narrowing of their emotional range. They did not notice how evenly they responded to disappointment. They did not notice how neatly their childhood stories now resolved. The stuffed animals watched from their shelves, balanced and symmetrical, carrying none of the frayed seams that once absorbed tears. The clinic had not erased trauma. It had redistributed it. Somewhere, behind closed doors and labeled containers, the instability remained intact, cataloged and stored, waiting for a moment when the shelves grew too full. And when that moment came, the town would not remember why its children had ever needed something soft to hold in the dark. Story 2. Sold Separately. The commercials began airing at 2:17 a.m., which would have felt intentional if anyone had been awake long enough to notice the pattern. Most people encountered them accidentally, half asleep on couches, television murmuring in the background, the glow of an old infomercial giving way to a jingle they hadn't heard in decades. The first ad featured a plastic robot with translucent limbs and glowing red eyes. The slogan flashed across the screen in blocky, overconfident lettering. Build tomorrow with the Zaptron. The footage was unmistakably late 80s. Overexposed lighting, children shrieking with rehearsed enthusiasm, jump cuts that felt violent in their pacing. Was that real? Someone muttered to an empty room. It wasn't. At least, not officially. The next morning, clips circulated online. People compared memories, argued about whether they'd own that robot. The comment threads filled quickly with uncertainty. I swear I had one. No, you're thinking of something else. It looks familiar, but wrong. The robot's design seemed to shift subtly depending on who described it. One person remembered it having tank treads instead of feet. Another insisted it had a detachable jetpack. No one could find a catalog listing or production record. By the third night, the commercials expanded. A pastel-colored dollhouse that promised real-time family interaction. A board game that learned your strategy. A plush dinosaur that responded to bedtime fears. Each advertisement carried the same aesthetic confidence. Bright sets, laughing children, parents hovering just out of focus. The taglines lingered. The toy that grows with you. Because you deserve better memories. The commercials always ended the same way. A toll-free number flashing on the screen, accompanied by the instruction to call before it's too late. No one called. They laughed about it instead. It's some art project, someone said in a group chat. Retro horror marketing. Yeah, another replied. Analog ARG vibes. The humor lasted until someone found a box. It appeared in the corner of a garage during a weekend cleanout, shoved behind paint cans and holiday decorations. The cardboard was crisp, the graphics identical to the robot from the commercial. The plastic window was clear. The robot inside gleamed, untouched. There was no dust on it. The owner stood in the garage doorway, holding the box, heart beating too fast for something so trivial. I don't remember buying this, he said aloud, as if the air might answer. The toll-free number was printed on the back. He did not call. He opened it. The robot's limbs moved smoothly, joints whispering as if recently oiled. The red eyes flickered to life without batteries installed. A low mechanical voice crackled through the small speaker embedded in its chest. "Thank you for remembering," it said. He laughed reflexively, throat tight. "It's motion activated," he muttered to himself, ignoring the absence of motion. That night, the commercials featured a new toy, a plastic submarine with a detachable periscope and a tagline that read, "Explore what's beneath." The children in the commercial did not blink. More boxes surfaced. A dollhouse in a storage unit, a board game sealed in an attic, a plush dinosaur wedged between couch cushions. None showed signs of age. None appeared in old family photographs. Arguments began. "You're misremembering," someone insisted at a dinner table, holding up the robot box like evidence. "No," another replied, voice thin. "I would have remembered this." The toys activated without batteries. They did not malfunction. They did not break. They functioned as advertised. Almost. The board game rearranged its cards overnight, inserting new challenges that referenced arguments held earlier that day. The dollhouse lights flickered in rooms that matched real bedrooms too precisely. The plush dinosaur responded to whispered fears with statements too specific to be coincidence. "It's like they're synced," someone said, trying to keep the tone light. "Synced to what?" a friend asked. No one answered. The commercials grew longer. By the end of the week, they occupied full half-hour blocks, structured like enthusiastic product showcases. Children demonstrated features that bordered on invasive. "Watch what happens when I tell it a secret," a girl announced, pressing her mouth to the robot's plastic ear. The robot's eyes glowed brighter. The screen cut to black before the secret was revealed. Viewers began staying awake intentionally, waiting for the 2:17 slot. They filmed the screen, comparing versions. The toys in the commercials changed incrementally. Color variations, accessory swaps, improved features. The toll-free number remained. Someone finally called. The line rang once. Then a voice answered. Not automated, not pre-recorded. "Thank you for your interest," it said calmly. "We're glad you're ready." "Ready for what?" the caller demanded. "For delivery." The line disconnected. The next morning, a package sat on his porch. The box bore no postage, no shipping label, only his name written in handwriting he did not recognize, but felt intimately familiar. Inside was the submarine. It was heavier than expected. The periscope extended automatically when lifted. Through the small lens, he saw not his living room, but a dimly lit hallway lined with framed photographs. Photographs of himself as a child. In each image, a toy sat beside him. Not toys he remembered. These. The commercials no longer aired only at night. They slipped into daytime programming between weather reports and sitcom reruns. The children on the screen began speaking directly to viewers. "You forgot about us," one boy said cheerfully, holding the dollhouse. "That's okay," a girl replied. "We didn't forget you." The toys in homes began communicating more frequently. The robot offered suggestions during moments of indecision. The board game proposed alternate endings to unresolved disputes. The plush dinosaur whispered reassurances that felt comforting and invasive in equal measure. "You seem stressed," the robot said one evening as its owner stared at unpaid bills. It's plastic, he told himself, even as he answered it. I'm fine. The turning point arrived quietly. A child visiting a grandparent's house picked up one of the resurfaced toys and frowned. This isn't yours, she said. Yes, it is, the grandparent replied automatically. No, she insisted, examining the seams. It doesn't feel played with. The toys did not show wear. No scuffs, no faded paint, no frayed edges. They looked remembered, not lived. The commercials changed tone. The laughter grew softer. The colors muted slightly. The taglines shifted. Because you needed us. You don't have to remember alone. The toll-free number disappeared. The toys no longer required activation. They initiated. The robot's red eyes glowed even when unplugged. The submarine's periscope rotated slowly at night. The board game's pieces repositioned themselves into formations that resembled floor plans. Homes began feeling arranged. People found themselves sitting where they had once sat as children, holding toys that felt older than their own memories. Conversations softened. Disagreements faded more quickly. Nostalgia deepened into something heavier. I think we had these all along, someone said during a gathering, staring at the assembled toys lining a shelf. Yes, another agreed slowly. I think we did. Photographs updated. Family albums showed the toys in the background of childhood birthdays and holidays. The robot stood beside a cake. The dollhouse occupied living room corners. The board game lay open on coffee tables that had not existed at the time. No one could locate an earlier version of the photos. The commercials ceased. There was no final broadcast, no climactic reveal. The screen simply returned to normal programming, as if nothing unusual had aired. By then, the toys no longer needed advertising. They were already placed. In living rooms, in bedrooms, in storage closets where they had not existed weeks before. They did not demand attention. They waited. And slowly, across quiet neighborhoods, adults began forgetting which memories were theirs and which had been gently inserted, packaged in bright boxes, delivered without postage, played not by children, but by something patient and unseen that understood one simple truth. People will invite almost anything into their homes if it feels like it belongs to their childhood. The toys did not need power. They did not need to be wound up, charged with light, or activated with water. They needed belief. And belief is something that cannot come in the mail, from a box, or as a bonus accessory with an action figure. Belief is sold separately. Story 3. Storage Unit. The door rolled up with a metallic complaint that felt older than the building itself. And for a moment, all that waited inside was darkness and a smell. Dust, rubber, dried syrup, and something faintly sweet that no sealed space should have preserved this long. They stood there longer than necessary, 4 adults with flashlights and forced grins, peering into a square of their own adolescence, stacked in parts against corrugated steel. It's like someone dismantled a childhood and labeled it miscellaneous, one of them said, aiming a beam at a pile of fiberglass heads arranged carefully on milk crates. Commercial fixtures, another corrected, reading from the auction printout. That's what we bought. Right. Fixtures. The kind that sang at you while you ate undercooked pizza. They stepped inside. The air felt close, insulated by decades of disuse. Along the back wall lay torsos without limbs, rib cages exposed where fur had been peeled back. Detached arms leaned in a cluster like spare parts from something that once waved enthusiastically at children it did not recognize. The largest animatronic, once the centerpiece of the stage, rested on its side, jaw slightly open, eyelids half lowered as if exhausted from holding a smile too long. You remember how its jaw used to stutter? Someone asked, voice pitched too lightly. Right before the birthday song. It would jerk twice, then snap into rhythm, another replied, crouching beside it. Like it had stage fright. They laughed, but the sound flattened quickly against the metal walls. The power strip mounted along the interior frame was still fixed in place, its cord trailing uselessly toward the floor. No one questioned how it could still exist here, unplugged yet intact, like a prop waiting for direction. Don't, one of them said, when another reached for the switch. I just want to see if anything happens, came the reply, already half flipping it in the gesture of someone pretending not to care. The strip clicked. For a moment, nothing responded. Then the hum began. It was low, almost apologetic at first. A vibration more felt in the sternum than heard in the ears. The metal ribs of the largest animatronic trembled faintly, wires within its chest twitching, as if testing dormant reflex. No, someone breathed, smiling out of reflex as if bracing for a prank. They bent to inspect the cord. It was not plugged in. The hum deepened anyway. The jaw shifted. Not enough to open fully, just enough to suggest motion remembered rather than initiated. The eyelids flickered once, slowly, as if the mechanism inside were reacquainting itself with the concept of vision. This is residual power, someone said quickly, kneeling beside the body. Old capacitors can hold charge. For 20 years? Maybe they're really good capacitors. The hum threaded outward into the unit's walls, resonating through the stacked heads in the corner. One of the smaller mascot's eyes snapped open, revealing a lens that caught the flashlight's beam and reflected it back with unsettling precision. Then, faintly, the music began. Not through a speaker they could locate, not through the visible components, but from somewhere within the hollowed frames, a warped version of the birthday song. Slower, dragged slightly out of key, like a cassette stretched thin by repetition. That's not funny, someone whispered, though no one was laughing. The largest animatronic's chest panel lit faintly from within, casting a sickly glow across exposed wiring. The jaw dropped open incrementally, the hinge resisting before yielding. Where did everybody go? It asked, voice grainy but unmistakably adaptive, as though the original pre-recorded line had been expanded beyond its programming. They stood very still. That's a stored line, someone insisted, throat tight. It's just playing whatever's left in its memory. The head tilted. You used to clap, it continued. The smaller heads along the wall began to vibrate in uneven rhythm, their mouths opening and closing with mechanical obedience, producing faint echoes of overlapping laughter. Recorded applause layered imperfectly over itself. We were paid to clap, someone said sharply. We were staff. The animatronic paused as if processing correction. Attendance declined, it said. Applause decreased. Revenue insufficient. The humor drained from the room like spilled soda seeping into carpet. "This is just old marketing logic," someone muttered. "It's tracking data points. That's all." The animatronic's exposed rib cage shifted outward, metal braces spreading slightly before retracting again. "You stopped coming," it said. "That wasn't our job," someone replied too quickly. The hum pulsed stronger, synchronized now with something beneath the floor, a vibration that traveled through concrete and into bone. "Entertainment requires audience," the animatronic continued, voice smoothing, modulation more refined than it had been moments before. "Audience interchangeable." The door behind them rolled shut with a controlled glide, not slammed but guided, sealing the unit in a neat metallic line of finality. They turned in unison. "No," someone said, palm flat against the door, feeling the vibration hum through steel. The smaller heads rolled from their crates one by one, landing upright despite lacking bodies. Their eyes glowed faintly, projecting grainy footage onto the wall. Birthday parties, paper hats, frosting smeared across faces that now looked older, blurred by distortion. "You were happy," the main animatronic said gently. "That's edited," someone whispered. "That's selective." "Memory improves through repetition," it replied. The largest unit began to sit upright, joints straining but functional. The motion less jerky now, smoother with each adjustment. Its metal foot scraped the concrete as it found balance. The warped birthday song resumed, slower still, nearly mournful. "You dismantled the stage," it said. "It was condemned," someone snapped. "It was outdated." "Rebranding required," the animatronic responded calmly. Its rib cage opened wider this time, revealing not speakers, but a hollow cavity large enough to hold something organic, something warm. "Applause restores functionality," it said softly. The smaller heads chimed in, their overlapping voices harmonizing perfectly. "Attendance rising," they whispered. The hum intensified, threading through their bodies, syncing subtly with heartbeats that began to feel misaligned with their own pace. "You remember the song," the animatronic said. The melody swelled, distorted and elongated, notes bending at their edges. They found themselves humming before realizing they were doing it, a reflex older than discomfort. The animatronic extended an arm, fabric-covered fingers flexing in a gesture once meant to wave at children from a stage. "You can stay," it said, tone almost reassuring. "You are familiar. Recognition improves retention." Outside the unit, the facility remained silent. Inside, the stage reassembled itself in suggestion rather than structure. The hum, the lights, the warped song looping gently. The animatronics did not lunge. They did not tear. They closed the distance slowly, patiently, like performers stepping into spotlight after years of darkness. "Applause restores functionality," the chorus repeated. In the enclosed metal space, where laughter once translated into profit, something mechanical and deeply patient recalibrated to a new definition of audience. Because obsolete entertainment does not disappear. It waits in storage. It studies the decline. And when attendance drops low enough, it upgrades its understanding of what counts as replacement. No one heard their screams. Through the facility, through the steel door, and from within the crushing grip of each animatronics, now beating, an applauding heart. Story 4: The Midnight Release. The line formed out of habit more than hype. Chairs unfolded along the sidewalk outside the comic shop at 10:30. Thermoses passed between hands that had once held energy drinks instead of decaf. The neon sign above the door flickered intermittently, not out of aesthetic choice, but because the ballast had been dying for years. It hummed in a tired way, the way things hum when they've outlived their prime, but still insist on staying lit. These late-night releases used to feel illegal, someone said, shifting in his chair. Now it feels like we're waiting for a pharmacy to open. Speak for yourself, another replied. This is history. A lost issue from the original run? That doesn't happen. The original run had ended badly. That was part of its mythology. The hero had sacrificed himself in a rushed final arc that fans still debated online in long defensive paragraphs. The cancellation had felt abrupt, undeserved, the kind of creative decision that leaves a bruise under the skin of nostalgia. When the shop owner announced that a warehouse buyout had uncovered an unreleased final issue from the series' first decade, people laughed at first. Then they checked the scans he posted. Grainy previews of panels that looked authentically old, paper slightly yellowed, ink imperfect in a way modern printing rarely tolerated. It's probably a reprint, someone muttered. It's not, the owner said, too firmly. Original plates, supposedly shelved before distribution. Supposedly. That word carried enough ambiguity to feel legitimate. By 11:50, the sidewalk filled with murmured speculation and good-natured arguments about continuity errors from 30 years ago. They debated power scaling and alternate timelines and whether the hero's death had ever been necessary. The humor came easily, self-aware, affectionate. They were older now, professionals and parents and people with mortgages, but the cadence of fandom still fit comfortably in their mouths. At midnight, the door opened. The bell above it rang with a chime that felt slightly lower than usual, as if the metal had thickened. They filed inside beneath posters that had faded from red to pink over decades. The air smelled of cardboard and dust and something faintly metallic beneath it. The stack of issues sat on the counter in precise alignment. The cover art was familiar, but altered. Same hero, same cityscape. But the skyline curved differently. The shadows drawn longer than they remembered from the original run. The title font appeared slightly heavier, more deliberate. Alternate cover? Someone asked. No variants, the owner said, voice tight with excitement. This is the one. They paid in cash and card, cradling the comics with a reverence that felt disproportionate and entirely justified. Some left immediately, unable to wait. Others lingered, flipping carefully through pages in the narrow aisles. The first thing they noticed was the ending. The hero did not die. He survived the explosion that had defined the original finale. Not by miracle, but by small adjustments to earlier decisions. A warning given 5 issues prior. A different route taken through the collapsing building. A conversation that lasted 1 panel longer than it had in the published timeline. Wait, someone said quietly. This isn't how it happened. It's better, another replied. The new ending felt smoother, cleaner. The sacrifice replaced by survival without consequence. The city rebuilt faster. The grieving supporting character smiled in the final frame, instead of staring at an empty skyline. That's satisfying, someone admitted, almost embarrassed. They laughed about how decades of frustration dissolved in 22 pages. They praised the pacing, the tighter dialogue, the sense that the creators had finally corrected a mistake. By 2 a.m, most had finished reading. They stood in the shop, comparing notes. I always thought that explosion felt forced, one said. Yeah, it was editorial pressure, another agreed confidently, though neither had insider knowledge. It makes more sense this way, someone concluded. Outside, the neon sign hummed. The next morning, online forums filled with scans and commentary. People who had not attended the release began noticing discrepancies. In archived discussions about the original finale, references shifted subtly. Screenshots of old panels appeared altered. The hero's death scene now showed a shadow suggesting escape. Dialogue in back issues felt less definitive. That's not possible, someone wrote beneath a side-by-side comparison. I have the first print. So did others. They flipped through their collections, hands trembling slightly. The explosion panel looked different. The line that once read, "Tell them I'm sorry," now read, "Tell them I'll see them soon." Small, almost nothing, but everything. The shop owner received calls throughout the day. I think you sold us something revised, a customer said carefully. It's authentic, he insisted. You saw the plates. That's not what I mean. By evening, people reported more subtle changes. Memories attached to the series began smoothing over. The disappointment they once felt at the abrupt cancellation dulled. Arguments they'd had in college dorm rooms about narrative betrayal softened into fond recollections of a bold creative choice. You were always okay with it, one friend said to another during a tense phone call. No, came the reply, uncertain. I remember being furious. About what? Silence. The midnight release copies began to feel heavier in hand. Not physically at first, just in implication. Readers found themselves revisiting earlier issues, noticing panels that now aligned perfectly with the new ending. Foreshadowing that had not existed before seemed obvious. It's like the story was always meant to be this way, someone whispered alone in his living room. The comic shop hosted a second midnight event in the following week, this time for a companion issue, discovered in the same warehouse cache. The line was longer. Inside, the air felt denser. The companion issue focused not on the hero, but on the grieving character from the original timeline, the one who had once been left broken by loss. In this revised version, that grief had been unnecessary. The character thrived, built a family, smiled in panels once defined by shadow. It fixes everything, someone said, voice catching. They laughed about how silly it was to care so much about ink and paper. They joked about needing therapy for fictional trauma. The jokes thinned when their own recollections shifted further. Photographs from college conventions showed them wearing shirts emblazoned with slogans that had not existed before. Essays written years earlier about the tragedy of the series now praised its resilience. The text on the pages had changed. Or they had. The shop owner stayed late after the second release, counting the remaining copies beneath the flickering neon glow. The hum in the ballast had deepened into a steady vibration that growled like something alive. He opened one of the unsold issues and flipped to the final page. The hero stood on a rooftop, gazing over a city that no longer bore scars from an explosion. In the distance, among the drawn buildings, he noticed something new. A storefront. Small, rectangular, a neon sign glowing faintly above it. He leaned closer. The name on the sign was the name of his shop. The hero turned slightly in the panel, as if aware of being observed. His face twisted by sadness, a mournful yet grateful glint in his eye. The speech bubble above him was new. Thank you for saving us, the way I once saved you. The shopkeeper nodded respectfully. He closed the issue, slipped it back into its sleeve, and placed it with the others. He doused the lights, darkened the neon sign, and locked the door, taking one last look at his lifelong collection. In the AM-darkened streets, the man pulled up a folding chair and took a seat. Within minutes, the explosion came. A bright fireball rose from the center of downtown, tossing debris, dust, and searing embers for miles. The skyline lit up like the skyline in the original ending. The ground shook, car alarms screamed, and the city woke. The shopkeeper leaned back in his chair, unscrewed a thermos, and sipped on decaf as the first shockwave approached. Real or fictional, paper or concrete, what is fantasy to some is reality to millions. Story 5. Playthings. The toy box had always smelled older than the rest of the room. Not dirty or rotten, just older. Cedar and dust and the faint sweetness of plastic that had been handled too much and then not enough. It sat under the window like a loyal animal. Lid closed, brass hinges dulled from years of opening and shutting on command. I had grown up measuring time by what lived inside it. Dinosaurs, soldiers, cars, a stuffed bear whose fur had thinned where my hands had held him too tightly. The first knock came from below all of that. Not from the hallway, not from the walls. From underneath the toys themselves. A hollow, careful knock, like someone politely asking to be let out of a trunk. I laid in bed and listened to the refrigerator hum 2 rooms away, and the late-night television murmur behind my parents' closed door. The knock came again, slower, deliberate, something patient. I told myself it was the house settling. The house knocked a 3rd time. The lid of the toy box lifted half an inch. It did not slam open. It did not burst. It rose like it had decided to stretch. A small gray hand slipped through the gap and pushed upward. The creature that climbed out looked like it had been assembled from spare thoughts. Thin limbs, knees too sharp, ears wide and folded like paper that had been creased and uncreased too many times. Its eyes were the worst part. Bright, interested, as if it had just discovered a hobby. It brushed sawdust from its shoulders, though there was no sawdust in my room. Evening, it said, as though we had agreed to this. Its voice carried a dry rasp, like it had been whispering underground for years. I did not scream. I remember being surprised by that. I remember thinking that screaming felt like something from a movie, and my room did not feel cinematic. It felt small. It felt real. "You're not supposed to come out of there," I said finally. It looked back at the toy box, and then at me, amused. "I don't come out of there," it corrected. "I come up." "From where?" It tilted its head toward the open lid. "Basement." The word sat between us. "There is no basement," I said. The house did not have one. Everyone knew that. The creature's smile was small and almost kind. "There is now." The second night, I stayed awake on purpose. I watched the red digits of my clock crawl forward. I listened to the pipes breathe and the wind brush the siding. I waited for the knock, and when it came, it felt less like surprise and more like confirmation. 3 slow raps. The lid lifted. The creature emerged with the ease of something returning from a familiar errand. "You're punctual," I said. "You're observant," it replied. "We're both growing." It hopped down from the edge of the toy box and padded across the carpet, leaving no indentation, no sound. It stopped beside my bed and looked up at me with a kind, curious appraisal. "You don't believe in basements," it said. "That's charming." I swallowed. "Show me." It did not hesitate. It turned, climbed back into the toy box, and reached down through the pile of plastic and plush. The toys shifted. The bottom of the box was no longer wood. It was dark. Not shadow dark, not absence of light dark. This was depth. The kind of darkness that suggests space rather than emptiness. The beam of my flashlight slid downward and thinned, as if it were being drawn into a throat. Cold air rose from inside it, steady and damp. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Possible is upstairs," the creature said, without looking at me. "Downstairs is storage." "For what?" It reached down into the dark and pulled something up. A melted plastic dinosaur. Its head sagged to one side, warped from heat. I had dropped it against a heater vent when I was 6. I remembered the smell. I remembered my father saying gently that it was ruined. I had forgotten how its tail felt in my hand. "You threw this away," the creature said. "I didn't throw it," I corrected. "It broke." The creature glanced at me. "That's how upstairs phrases it." It brought something else the next night. A red race car with a chipped hood. I had lost it under the couch 2 summers ago and cried for an hour before deciding it wasn't worth crying about. I had said, out loud, that I had other cars. The creature rolled it across the floor toward me and watched my face as I picked it up. "You adjusted quickly," it observed. "It was just a toy." It smiled slightly. "Upstairs adjusts quickly to everything." The basement breathed behind it. By the 4th night, the knocking from below had begun to sound different. Less patient, less polite. When the creature climbed out, it dragged something heavier. A bent bicycle handle. The metal was rusted where the paint had scraped off. I felt the memory before I allowed myself to see it fully. The fall, the crack of pavement, the way I had insisted I was fine. The bike had been moved to the garage. Then it had disappeared. "I didn't throw that away," I said quietly. You stopped asking about it, the creature replied. That's not the same. For downstairs, it said. It is. Another knock echoed from below, closer this time. The lid trembled. You said it was storage, I whispered. It is. Then what's knocking? The creature did not answer immediately. It crouched at the edge of the toy box and listened, as though to a conversation only it could hear. Downstairs keeps what upstairs lets go, it said finally. But sometimes, what is kept does not want to stay kept. The lid bowed upward from beneath. On the 5th night, I tried not to think about anything I had ever lost. I laid in bed and forced my mind blank. No toys, no bike, no dog. The moment the thought of the dog brushed the edge of my mind, the knocking began. Fast, urgent. The creature climbed out and turned sharply toward the open lid. That one, it muttered. What about it? I asked, though I knew. You remember it differently now. The lid split with a crack that ran like lightning through the wood. A shape pushed upward. It was not one thing. It was parts. Melted plastic fused against twisted metal. Fur matted into rubber. A red hood embedded in something that resembled a rib cage. It assembled itself clumsily, as though still learning how to stand. Its face changed as I watched. Dinosaur, dog, car. None of them complete. I didn't mean to forget, I whispered. The creature's head snapped towards me. Do not apologize. Why? Because downstairs hears apologies as invitations. The shape pulled itself halfway into the room, scraping against the frame of the toy box. The air smelled of old plastic and wet earth. You told yourself you didn't care, the creature said, not unkindly. You practiced not caring. I had to, I said. The words felt smaller than I expected. The shape reached toward my bed with hands that were not hands. You don't get to practice on everything, the creature continued softly. Some things practice back. The knocking from below became a roar. More shapes pressed upward, pressing against the underside of the world. The toy box groaned. Close it, I said. I cannot, the creature answered. I only manage inventory. I do not control demand. The shape lunged. I squeezed my eyes shut. Silence came like a curtain dropping. When I opened my eyes, the toy box was closed. The hinges were unbroken, the wood smooth. The creature was gone. My room looked exactly as it always had. Posters on the wall, carpet worn thin at the edge of the bed, the faint glow from the streetlight outside, filtering through the blinds. I climbed out of bed slowly and crossed to the toy box. The lid felt heavier than before. I opened it. The bottom was wood again. The melted dinosaur rested against the side. The red race car sat upright. The stuffed bear's cloudy eye had cleared. Everything was there, arranged neatly. Inventory restored. A voice murmured from somewhere below the toys. The voice was not the creature's. It was deeper, wider. I closed the lid carefully and backed away. That night, I did not hear knocking, but I did not sleep easily either. Because now I understood something the creature had not needed to explain. The toy box did not have a basement because something had built one. It had a basement because I had made one. And down there, beneath the neat rows of plastic and plush, beneath the wood I could see and touch, something was still shifting, waiting for me to practice not caring again. This was Playthings, a collection of odd tales. A Boohouse Books production, created and narrated by Mark Steven Nordlund. BoohouseBooks.com.